And if you push the fat man off the bridge, he'll crash into the train, and the train will stop, and he'll kill the fat man, but it will stop it from running over the 5 people who are tied to the track. Would you push that fat man off the bridge? You would?
Yeah.
So, no, good. That means you seem to be thinking very rationally about it.
You would actually push a fat guy? I don't know if I'm
strong
enough, because I can't really lift much weight, but yes.
I don't get the physics. If you push him off the bridge...
Yeah, because the train's going under the bridge.
Oh, the train's going under the bridge. I thought the train's going over the bridge. I need diagrams.
The train was going over the bridge.
I thought the train is like, one of the Western movies where the people are running. You know, see Stand By Me?
Yeah, no, right? Yeah, that's
how I think. One of the guys is bad. I'm like, okay,
it's not stop the train.
I'm still saving 5 people.
Right, so
you would kill someone you're with is completely...
Pulling the lever is killing. So I've made that decision. Now I'm just shoving instead of pulling the lever.
You would just shove this guy off the bridge.
I mean, again, I'm not strong, but I would try.
But he's on the edge, it's your friend, and he's looking at these like, oh my god, these people are gonna die.
Yeah, my friend is different. Friend is different.
Why?
Because then I am inconsistent. No, then I am inconsistent. If my mom is on the bridge or 5 strangers, I'm not pulling the lever, I'm not shoving my mom. That is, now if it's my dad, he's home. But yeah, that's my inconsistency will stop at my wife, my kids, my mom, my best friends, sure. But in general, if I'm saving 5 people and they're all strangers, I'm saving 5 people. Yeah. And I'm not utilitarianism to the absolute. That's crazy at a certain point. But like, I do largely have that idea. Like, it's saving more people. What are we doing?
Yeah. So it's something funny. They put people in an MRI scanner and asked them about the trolley problem, and the people who said that they would pull the lever, but they wouldn't push the fat man, which is most people, by the way, I think.
That's weird.
People who would pull the lever but wouldn't push the fat man, in the MRI scanner, the part of their brain that like deals with emotion was lighting up. Whereas the people who said that they would pull the lever and push the fat man, the part of their brain that deals with like rational thinking,
that's me,
was lighting up. And so it was an indication that a lot of people just think emotively about this and don't realise. They think that they're considering an ethical consideration, but really they're just like feeling it out. And so it's interesting. So people like you seem to be thinking like rationally about it, and you're trying to sort of put it in like very sort of non-emotive terms. But then you said like you'd be inconsistent when it comes to like your family. Right. And the question is like, why? Or is it inconsistent? Or do you just have an ethical worldview which says that it's okay to prioritise your own family?
I have a love for those people that's overwhelming to the point that ethics is not a concern of mine, morality is not a concern of mine.
But maybe that's just what ethics is. Maybe ethics is about like love, and maybe ethics just permits you to care more about your family.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I mean?
But again, this is where I'm not saying it's to dismiss what you do. This is where my brain jumps to like, yeah, whatever it is, I'm fine with it. I understand there is inconsistency, and I'm okay with that level of inconsistency.
And that's another thing when I was saying about like the philosophical masturbating. Most people, they have their ideas, but like if you're like, oh, I think torture is always wrong, and I think that we should minimize suffering and harvest organs in this circumstance. But if someone like holds a gun to your daughter's head, that just goes out the window. Yeah. Like nobody is nobody except maybe like Peter Singer. He's probably the kind of person that would actually sit there and like do a calculation on a nice little sheet of paper. But nobody's thinking in this way. That's not.
Have you read that Jonathan Haidt book, The Righteous Mind?
I haven't actually read it.
Are you familiar with it? Yeah. That we're like emotional beings and drift this logic afterwards. Yeah. So that's probably what we're getting to about all this. But maybe his emotion is to protect as many people as possible, and our emotion is more selfish. Yeah. Like maybe you have more altruistic emotions. Like you're like everybody's a stranger. I'll protect those 5 strangers over that one, and the rest of us are like, I don't want to be a killer.
The guilt of letting 5 people die to me would be overwhelming.
Okay, so so say there's a track. This time the track is like a circle, and there's a person tied on that end, and you're sitting with the lever, and the trolley's going around, and the lever only changes the direction of the trolley, so you can sort of make it go back and forth. Mm-hmm. How many times do you pull that lever before you let it run over the guy?
Oh, I would like to think in a vacuum, infinite, but. If everybody in the train is saying X, Y, Z to me, who knows at a certain point?
No, on the train, like you stood there, like, and you're pulling this lever back and forth. I mean, the guy's he's just tied to the track, he's just gonna die anyway.
I wait for him to die and then I go. Once he dies of starvation,
you would stand there for like a week, like staying awake, pulling that lever. To watch him.
If my body gives out, my body gives out.
To watch him slowly die.
You gotta do a little bit. You gotta do it at least 5-10 times. You can't just let it go and then explain to why.
5 times?
This is what you would do. No,
why not, man?
No, you would go back and forth, right?
I actually understand your logic. Now that you're saying,
I don't know because like
it's euthanasia, basically. But this guy's
actually terrified.
Oh, he's gonna die no matter what.
No matter what. Maybe the ethical thing is just letting him.
Like how long are you gonna?
I think you gotta start explaining that.
How long it took me to realize that? That's how many times.
You just said that you want to watch him like starve to death, which is like a horrible. I'd rather be hit by a train.
He didn't say he wants to watch him starve to death.
Well, that
would happen. But that's what he wants.
That is what he wants to do in that circumstance.
He wants to not be responsible for his death. Him starving.
Then don't pull the lever at all. Because, like, remember a moment ago we were talking about
not pulling the lever at all.
Yeah. You said, well, if I pull the lever, then I'm involving myself. It's like, well, then don't just leave.
Who invented this lever thing? This is great. What did you guys do before trains? Before trains, what did you have to talk about?
Atlantis and shit.
Yeah. The fucking kids. What is it? The green tablets of oath.
They're running trains on pilgrims.
I mean, but the invention of the train really changed your guys' whole life.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, what would you talk about before? You're like, should we be communists? People need to eat. People are hungry. People would debate. And the fucking train was invented. You're like, yeah, this is good.
People would debate weird and wacky stuff. Like famously, Plato defined a human being as a featherless biped. That's his definition of what a human being is. And then he was biped. Why about 2? So an animal with 2 feet and doesn't have any feathers. So then I think it was Diogenes who like took a chicken and plucked all of its feathers and like ran into the room where Plato was teaching and held it up and went, behold, Plato is man. You know? And so they would just debate shit like that all the time, and it was just essentially definitional.
And why was this supported? Like, who was funding this back in the day? Are you
Education, I suppose, used to be just a privilege of people who could afford it.
But this could be a job. Like back in the day, there were people that were just waxing poetic on philosophy, and the king was like, "Yeah, keep doing that shit."
I don't know about like back in ancient times. I don't really know how they were making their money.
You have students as well, wouldn't they?
But yeah, they'd have like students. But then I think that some philosophers would probably have students that didn't pay. They just like had a school of people, like Jesus of Nazareth style.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you'd have students. I mean, famously, Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great. You know, like there's some pretty high clientele that wants some philosophical wisdom, and so they're probably making money through that.
Do we have enough time?
There are endless.
Or even a hot take.
How were they viewed societally, real quick? Like, how would Aristotle be viewed societally at the time?
Depends on what kind of philosopher they were. Like Socrates was a nuisance. People didn't like him.
Yeah. Is there some revisionist history on these people as we look back?
How do you mean?
Like, do we look at them as almost deities? Right? It's like brilliant. They're genius.
Oh yeah, like, but yeah, at the time, like, a lot of these philosophers, if you like read their biographies, they're like depressed, miserable people who couldn't get laid. Like it's seriously.
It's like Van Gogh.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same kind of thing where like you wouldn't want to be these guys. Like, why do you think like Immanuel Kant had the time to like sit around writing like the longest treatise on like on like objective ethics that the world's ever seen? Because he's a loser. You know? Nothing else going on. Like what are you gonna do? Like Arthur Schopenhauer wrote an essay about women. Okay. Where he just like talks about how women are just inferior to men, and he just goes on and on and on about how and you read it and you're sort of like this sort of hyper rational guy, and you're like, but this is clearly just because like you can't get. Apparently he was like a bit of a womanizer, but I think he might have like had some trouble. Like people like rejected his proposals and stuff. And so actually I was speaking to a friend earlier who said that any idea that anybody has, anytime like say like a policy is come up with by a politician or anything of that sort, they should have to undergo like a psychological analysis to find out how much of that due to the fact that their like dad didn't care about them as a kid or something. Like you've got to make sure that there's none of that going on.
Don't they just with detectives that like you're too close to this case, you knew one of the people that were hurt, you're going to be too emotional, we take you off of it.
Yeah,
this is what they would hope.
But we should probably do that with like politicians too. It's like you shouldn't essentially just be using your rage to write about this kind of stuff. And I think that's clearly what's happening with Schopenhauer writing about women, for example.
How many other philosophers do you think this is happening to? Like, are there people that you're reading and you're like, oh, you actually have some deep issues that you're emotionally reacting to, and then just retrofitting your brilliance onto it?
That might be true of most philosophers. So most people have motivations that aren't always immediately obvious.
I've heard this about Charles Darwin.
What about?
That his brother died of some type of like malignant cancer or something to that effect, and he was told that he was going to go to hell, and so he took it upon himself to scientifically prove that God doesn't exist or something.
Darwin's child died.
Maybe that's what it is.
I think his youngest child might have died, and it does seem to sort of have an effect. I'm not sure if that like motivates like the biology of the origin of species, but it will motivate his like religious views. Darwin actually, interestingly, at the end of the origin of species, there's a beautiful little epilogue where he says there is grandeur in this view of life. It's a famous piece where he talks about from so humble and simpler beginnings, endless life, and endless forms, most beautiful, happy and happy. That's how it ends. It's beautiful. And he talks about how life having originally been breathed into a few forms or into one. And there was such a backlash from the religious that in the second edition of The Origin of Species, there is an edition that's breathed by the Creator into few forms or into one. Because he felt the need to add in this reference to God, and few forms or into one. And there was such a backlash from the religious that in the second edition of The Origin of Species, there is an edition that's breathed by the Creator into few forms or into one. Because he felt the need to add in this reference to God, and it's probably due to the backlash, but it may also just reflect his own like flip-flopping on religion. Because by the third edition, it was gone again. This happens quite a lot, like people like defacing their books. Like Peter Singer recently did this for Animal Liberation, the father of the animal rights movement, who wrote in 1975 the greatest defense of animal ethics that has probably ever been written. I mean, it's just phenomenal and very confronting. And he was using all of these arguments that in the most recent updated edition he felt the need to take out because they were like not politically correct anymore. Even though they were really useful philosophical arguments, he took them out. So for example, when he talks about giving animals rights, a lot of people say, well, we can't give animals the same rights as humans. We're not going to give them the right to vote and stuff like that. And Peter Singer is like, well, to give people equal consideration doesn't mean you literally give them the same rights. For example, you wouldn't give men abortion rights. And that's not an inequality thing. You give them the same consideration, but it doesn't mean you give them literally the same rights. It just means that you give them the same consideration. So you wouldn't give men abortion rights, you wouldn't give animals voting rights, but you give them the same consideration.
Special needs people vote.
They literally can, yeah.
They're allowed to vote.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I assume so. I don't know if there is.
Is that a crazy thing to ask? Like,
no, but it's not.
I'm asking based on the same, it's the same hypothetical. Like, if we deem an adult 18 years old and they have the mental capacity of an 18-year-old, I guess we don't do that with IQ.
It's totally arbitrary because like voting is like the justification for voting is always like, well, like it will lead to a better society and people, but really people feel like they have a right to vote. it's not so voting isn't supposed to be like this is obviously the best way to always get to the right answer. It's like no, it's a point of principle that if you're going to tax me, I have a say.
And even if they have the wherewithal to register to vote, then they should be able to.
But it is completely arbitrary. Like the age limit on voting is completely arbitrary.
I feel it's way too loose. You let too many people vote.
Yeah. A lot of people feel that way, man. Like and Aristotle thought the same. John Stuart Mill thought that different people should have different like numbers of votes. So like, people who have a university education should get more votes than someone who didn't, and stuff like this.
Alright guys, let's take a break for a second. If you're looking for an easy way to take care of your mental, physical, and emotional wellness, make cornbread hemp CBD gummies a piece of your wellness plan. Obviously, you've tried CBD. If you haven't, you know the positive effects that come with it. Cornbread hemp CBD gummies are made to help you feel better with it, whether you're dealing with some stress, some discomfort, or you just need a little bit of relaxation. They only use the best part of the hemp plant, the flower, for the purest and most potent CBD, formulated to help relieve discomfort, stress, and sleeplessness. Pop one before you go to bed, get a nice sleep, have a great next day. All products are third-party lab tested and USDA organic to ensure safety and purity. Can't tell you how crucial that is. And right now, Flagrant listeners can save 30% on their first order. Just head to cornbreadhemp.com/flagrant and use the code flagrant at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/flagrant and use the code flagrant at checkout. Now let's get back to the show.
Voting systems are never perfect because people have an idea that you just sort of vote and whoever gets the most votes wins, and that's what democracy is. But it's never quite like that. I mean, like in the United Kingdom, there's a big debate over whether we should keep our so-called first-past-the-post system of voting.
What does that mean?
It means that if you get like a majority of votes, if you sort of, it's the first person to reach a certain number of votes, what they call it first-past-the-post. First person to get that wins, right? And so if you've got like 5 different parties, and say like 50% of people like vote for one of those parties, they're going to like win the election, but the rest of the voter base is spread across all these different parties, and so they all just like lose, and there's no like proportional representation of the different amount of votes the different parties got. It's just like if you get the most, then you win. And because people often like split their votes from different parties, like if you don't want to vote for the Conservative Party, maybe you vote for Labour, or maybe you vote for Green, or maybe you vote for this. Like you end up sometimes with a party winning who most people actually didn't vote for. And had they done it in stages where you sort of knock out the lowest contender and then vote again, they wouldn't have won the election because all the people who voted Green, now they're out, would have gone and voted Labour, so Labour would have won the election.
Well, what's the cost of that?
Well, the cost of that, so people say we should. So you get the smaller parties in the UK saying we should have proportional representation because you have like millions and millions of votes, but you get like no seats or 2 seats in the House of Commons, and so they say we should have it proportional. The problem with that is that nothing gets done because you just got like 15 different parties, all different ideas, and absolutely nothing gets done. But if your view is like, well, okay, sure, it'd be more democratic to have more parties in government, but nothing actually gets done.
But it's not functional.
Why bother with the democracy thing at all?
So this is two parties. Is there like a principle in philosophy where you just reach a limit where you go, we got to get shit done? So you stop before you extrapolate it to the end of the trolley problem.
Yeah, it's called authoritarianism.
No, I'm not saying in government. I'm just saying like in philosophy, like do you get to a point where you're like, okay, we all kind of agree on this. Yes, there are some holes in it, but this is 70% or this is 80% that everybody kind of agree on. Let's just use this as a model for society, but we can have these thought experiments outside
you can be like a pragmatist. Is that what that's called? In utilitarianism, there's a particular sort of version that's called rule utilitarianism. So utilitarianism says that any action you should basically do a calculus and figure out whether it's going to have more or less suffering and pleasure for people. But the problem is that doing that every time is itself not maximizing pleasure, right?
You're not being utilitarian.
Yeah, like being utilitarian is not utilitarian, so you sort of undermine yourself. So they come up with this thing called rule utilitarianism, which broadly is attributed to John Stuart Mill, and he's like, look, okay, we'll come up with these rules. Like, broadly speaking, murdering people minimizes pleasure, and sure, there will be circumstances where it doesn't, but like, for the sake of being practical, we'll just call that a rule and we'll abide by that. And so it's still justified by the minimization of suffering, but in practice, we'll just follow these broad rules.
Yeah.
And that sounds really great, right? Until you realize that sometimes there will be obvious counterexamples. Like if you don't murder this person, New York City is going to get like decimated. You might still think you should murder the person, but the utilitarian definitely thinks you should kill that person to save New York City, right?
Right.
And so there are obvious cases where they would go, okay,
I'd let New York go. That's one city.
Actually, maybe we should change it up.
I hear this is like the bombing the Yemeni wedding.
Yeah,
right? There's one terrorist in the Yemeni wedding. Like, do we bomb it and then we save America from a possible terror attack?
Yeah, and if the circumstance is obvious enough, then even the rule utilitarian has to look at it and be like, yeah, okay, in this case I'll break my rule. But then you've got this problem of like, in every circumstance, you've then got to figure out whether it's an obvious enough example to apply the rule or not. And then you're just back to just looking at every single individual circumstance.
Like Luigi Mangione kind of be an example of that, or no?
Yeah, so I mean, you might kind of think that generally speaking it's bad to murder people, but people are like, oh, but in this case it's like an exception. Like maybe some people would think that.
Yeah. And that's something the cultural response.
But what your cultural response is, we got more pleasure, but people got more pleasure, and because they got more pleasure, does it justify the
why did they get pleasure out of it?
Because they think these healthcare companies are evil and all the people involved are complicit.
And if you do it enough, maybe they'll.
But specifically, evil why? Like, what is it that they're doing?
They're undermining pleasure for the most people.
Exactly. So it's kind of there's this sort of underlying assumption of a utilitarian principle for these people that like, well, okay, it's bad to kill somebody, but if they're going to cause more people to suffer and die, is this a utilitarian
This is
capitalism?
justification for war, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah, war is well, at least ostensibly, it'll be like this is what's good. But war tends to have a more sort of like the family thing. It's not just because if you were utilitarian, and like a country declares war on you, and you're like, what's their population? Is it bigger than us? Okay, let them have it, right? That's not what you do. It's more like family. Then you're like, to hell with that. I'm going to like defend my own principles. You know?
Okay, so Brexit, for example.
Yeah.
Good. No, this idea that there are people that feel like they're losing their cultural identity, and we don't have to argue whether it's right or wrong, but I'm just saying that idea, if we're taking a utilitarian principle and we're just plastering on top of that, do they feel less pleasure as culture becomes more diverse, and then their specific culture becomes, in their perception, diluted?
For sure, yeah. I mean, that seems to be the motivation behind Brexit. It was essentially an immigration vote, in my view. That's
a lot of people seem to feel.
Like, yeah, okay, a lot of people were talking about the economy, and sort of they're getting up on their talk shows, and they're like, well, you know, like Brexit and the GDP and 4.8, it's like, no one cares.
Yeah.
Okay, some people care, but you know what I mean? That's not what it was about.
Yes.
And yeah, like, the thing is, I mean, I've been talking about utilitarians. Like, I'm not a utilitarian. Most people aren't utilitarian. They think they are until they come across an example like where they've got to tie their own child to a truck or something, and they're like, to hell with that. And it's like, okay, well then you're not actually a utilitarian like you thought you were.
Yeah.
Instead, you're something else. And in my view, people are just emoting. I'm what's called an emotionist about ethics. I think that all ethical statements are just expressions of emotion.
I think that's
all I think is going on.
Yes.
And so, in this instance, like, if you're a utilitarian, what it is about.
Yes.
And yeah, like, the thing is, I mean, I've been talking about utilitarians. Like, I'm not a utilitarian. Most people aren't utilitarians. They think they are until they come across an example like where they've got to tie their own child to a truck or something, and they're like, to hell with that. And it's like, okay, well then you're not actually a utilitarian like you thought you were.
Yeah.
Instead, you're something else. And in my view, people are just emoting. I'm what's called an emotionist about ethics. I think that all ethical statements are just expressions of emotion.
I think that's
all I think is going on.
Yes.
And so, in this instance, like, if you're a utilitarian, you can say, well, it's complicated because, yeah, more people get pleasure if they can immigrate into a country, but then the amount of suffering that comes with, like, losing a sense of identity, that might balance it out. Or you just be like, you're just sort of vibing, man.
Well,
you're just trying to feel it out.
I think that there's an emotional reaction to that too. I mean, they are emotivists. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
It makes them feel better to have a technical justification for their emotional response.
Yeah.
So they're calling it utilitarian, but it's really not that. They're
Exactly.
like,
People want to stick a label on there. Like, that's what a lot of philosophy is. It is essentially hyper-rationalizing of your emotive feelings.
Yeah.
That's why you have all of these clever people who agree with each other. It's also why I could say, like, name some of the most famous philosophers in the world, like Nietzsche or Immanuel Kant or John Stuart Mill. And a lot of people get this idea that because they're great philosophers, if I just pick one at random and sit down and start reading it, I'll be like, wow, this guy's amazing. But if you try that, go into a philosophy department, pick up like Jean-Paul Sartre and just read it, and you'll be like, what is this? Because the great philosophers are people who you kind of already know that you're like on the same wavelength as them, and you read it and they just put it into words, and you're like, yeah, man, that's what it is. That's the feeling of, I think, that someone's smart is sort of looking at it and going like, yeah, they put that, but because they just rationalize what you're already thinking. Education, I think that the Greek word that comes from, I can't remember what the word actually is, like, edukratos or something like this, means to draw out. Education is not like the so-called bucket theory of the mind, which is like, you're just a bucket and the teacher comes and just chucks stuff in there. It's a more like two-way relationship, and to educate someone is to draw out of them because there's something already inside them that you are like pulling out. Education has to be something which, I don't mean like as a moral thing, this is how we should be educating our kids. I mean, this is literally what happens in many people's view. It's like a two-way relationship. You have to, the person who's learning has to sort of take a guess at the world and then like test ideas against the guess that they're making, and then the teacher sort of helps them with that. So it's a drawing out, you know. That's what philosophers do. So you're reading a text, and it's not just like you're getting information. Somebody is systematizing the way that you feel. Mm-hmm. You know, like when you read Schopenhauer's essay about women, you'll probably have this experience of thinking like, that's he gets it. Yes, fucking guy. Yeah. But on a serious level, like if you read that essay, like most people read that and it's sort of like, what the hell is he going on?
Yeah, they might think he's a maniac.
And it's like, it's so that's a great example to show that like what you're doing is you're bringing if you are like a genuine sexist and you read this, you'll be like, yeah, man, he's so smart. And your assessment of how like intelligent he is
has to do with how much you agree with him.
Will just be basically like how much you sort of already agree with him, you know?
Yeah.
And to what level he sort of resonates with you. And sometimes there will be people who come along and change your mind, so you don't already agree with them. You're like, oh, well, that's really smart, that changes my mind. But it's because you've already got some kind of surface level agreement on something, and they've taken that assumption and said, well, that should lead you here rather than there.
Yeah, I wonder if changing your mind has to do with this feeling of like guilt or shame. Like a lot of times, I'm sure you've heard like Shapiro going on about like facts don't care about your feelings or whatever. We've spoken a lot about like,
I think actually care about your facts.
We say it all the time. They don't care about your facts at the fuck all. So I wonder if sometimes you're presented with facts and they make you feel this guilt or shame that you believe this thing that was wrong, and now you feel stupid, now you feel silly, you feel misled, and it's that personal feeling. You're not going, oh, I will follow the facts now. You're like, I don't want to be an idiot, I don't want people to think that I'm an idiot. I've changed my philosophy.
Yeah, I think a lot of thinking is just feeling. Like when you become convinced by something, like for example, what is at the basis of our like epistemology, how we know things? Like I can see a sort of water bottle here, and I think this water bottle exists. That doesn't seem like an emotion. It feels like a rational thing that I believe. It's like something that's true or false, right? But why do I believe that this water bottle exists? Because I can see it. But why do I believe that? Because I can see it, it's really there, or because I think that my sense data is accurate, you know, and I'm not like a brain in a vat somewhere. It's like, well, why do I think that? But because like if I didn't, I would just be in this skeptical hellhole and I wouldn't know anything.